There's a European family that has quietly ruled the financial world for over 400 years. They're not the Rothschilds. They're not the Rockefellers. In fact, most people have never even heard their full name. But if you combine the market value of Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, you still wouldn't reach even half of what this family controlled at their peak. And the crazy part, they're still in power today. Buckle up. Because today we're diving into the hidden story of the House of Orange-Nassau and how they literally invented the blueprint for modern capitalism. Let me take you back to the year 1580. Picture this: the Iberian Peninsula is about to witness something that will shake the entire world order. Spain, already one of the most powerful empires on earth, is about to absorb Portugal through a personal union. Now, think about what this means for a second. Two massive global superpowers suddenly merged under a single crown. Together, Spain and Portugal control vast territories spanning Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Their combined fleets dominate the oceans. Their armies are unstoppable. Their wealth, unimaginable. But there's one small problem for a tiny nation in Northern Europe. You see, the Dutch are watching this merger with absolute terror. Why? Because technically, they're still part of Spain at this moment. But they're fighting a brutal war for their independence. And now, suddenly, their enemy just became twice as powerful. The Dutch Republic finds itself in an impossible situation. They're a small nation of merchants and traders, locked in a death struggle against the combined might of the Spanish and Portuguese empires. They're outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of time. Spain and Portugal have everything: massive armies, endless silver from the Americas, control of the spice trade, naval supremacy. The Dutch have what exactly? Windmills, tulips, a few trading posts. They realized something profound: they couldn't beat Spain and Portugal with guns alone. So, they built a new kind of weapon. A weapon so powerful that it would eventually conquer more territory and accumulate more wealth than any army ever could. That weapon was private capital. In the year 1602, something unprecedented happens. 7 private Dutch trading companies merge into a single entity. We know it today as the VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. Now, on the surface, this looks like just another merchant company. Right, wrong. Dead wrong. Under the deck, this wasn't a company. It was a machine of economic warfare disguised as a business. The VOC had its own armed warships, its own private armies, its own forts scattered across the globe. It could sign treaties with foreign nations. It could wage war. It could capture and govern entire territories. But here's the truly radical part that nobody saw coming: the VOC's shares. For the first time in human history, ordinary Dutch citizens could buy shares in this imperial expansion and profit from it directly. This wasn't wealth tied to noble titles or land ownership anymore. This was wealth manufactured at scale through markets. The VOC could expand like no kingdom ever had before, without a single monarch and without ever raising taxes. The merchants were running the show, drawing up the blueprints. But someone else was quietly keeping the foundation of this revolutionary company standing. Someone who understood that the old rules were dead and new ones needed to be written. Across the Dutch Republic, the House of Orange-Nassau was watching all of this unfold very carefully. Now, you're probably wondering, who exactly is the House of Orange? No, I'm not talking about the fruit. I'm talking about one of the most fascinating dynasties in European history. A family that held no kingdoms, no vast lands, no divine right to rule. They were nobles in name only, holding a weak title in a fragile republic that was actually run by wealthy merchants. Think about how bizarre their situation was. The merchant elites of Amsterdam wanted more republican control and less noble interference. Spain wanted the entire dynasty extinguished. And the House of Orange had no real land to rule, no mines to exploit, no traditional source of power. They were squeezed from every side. During this collapse of the old feudal order, the House of Orange faced a brutal choice: fade into complete irrelevance or adapt to this strange new world where money mattered more than bloodlines. They couldn't rely on feudal land rents anymore. They couldn't depend on inherited gold. So they gambled everything on the only thing they had left: capital. Here's what's brilliant about their strategy. The House of Orange didn't directly run the VOC, but they sure as hell helped bankroll it. More importantly, they tied their entire family's future to its success. This wasn't just some symbolic investment. This gave them strategic leverage in a merchant republic where your legacy and your family name no longer automatically guaranteed power. Decades later, that connection became official and undeniable. To stadholders, basically high-ranking officials, named William IV and William V descended from the House of Orange and served as presidents of both the VOC and the Dutch West India Company. Through these positions, they effectively became among the most powerful men not just in the Netherlands, but in all of Europe. As the VOC expanded east, conquering territory after territory, the House of Orange rose with it. Still without crowns, mind you. Still without traditional kingdoms. But their power was now backed by something far more reliable than divine right: dividends. The VOC carried the Dutch Republic's flag across the world. But it also carried the ambitions of a family that was building an empire in complete silence. The VOC didn't behave like a business. It moved like a sovereign nation. And that was entirely the point. When your market capitalization dwarfs the GDP of major countries, when your private armies defeat military superpowers, when you can wage war and sign peace treaties, you're not just another company. You're an imperial state in your own right. At its absolute peak, the Dutch East India Company was worth more than $7.9 trillion in today's money. Just to put that in perspective for you, the most valuable company in the world today is Nvidia, which is currently worth less than half of that. Let that sink in for a moment. This 400-year-old trading company was worth more than double our most valuable modern corporation. During the VOC's golden era, from the early 1600s to the mid-1700s, over 1 million people departed the Netherlands bound for Asia. They boarded massive fleets of ships called East Indiamen, floating symbols of Dutch ambition sailing into unknown waters. But here's what's fascinating: these weren't explorers chasing adventure. They weren't settlers pursuing dreams of a new life. They were employees of a mega-corporation. The VOC recruited sailors, clerks, soldiers, craftsmen, administrators, and more to build its trade empire across Ceylon, Java, Bengal, and beyond. This workforce ran the VOC's ports, guarded its warehouses, negotiated with local rulers, and enforced Dutch interests. Sometimes at gunpoint. Behind all those astronomical profits was a massive human engine. 1 million lives sailing across dangerous oceans to serve the world's most powerful trading company. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. But none of this happened by accident. The success of the VOC stood firmly on 3 pillars: a powerful state charter, Amsterdam's financial elite, and the strategic backing of the House of Orange. The charter wasn't just some business license. It was closer to a royal mandate. The VOC had full monopoly control over Dutch trade in Asia, but its powers went far beyond commerce. The company could sign international treaties, raise armies, capture foreign territories, and even govern entire colonies as if it were a sovereign nation. Every move the VOC made carried the weight of a national flag. Even though the orders came from a corporate boardroom, with nearly 150 merchant ships, around 50,000 employees worldwide, and its own standing army of 10,000 professional soldiers, the VOC operated like a state that just happened to have a sales department. And across the map, from the Persian Gulf all the way to Japan, it left its mark everywhere it touched. Nowhere was its dominance more absolute than in the East Indies, the epicenter of the spice trade and the company's ultimate prize. In 1610, the VOC gained permission to build a small trading post near the Siloam River. By 1619, they had captured the entire city of Jakarta and renamed it Batavia, after the ancient name for the Netherlands. This wasn't just a symbolic name change. Batavia became the center of gravity for all of Asia. It's why you still see so much Dutch influence in Indonesia today in the food, the language, the culture, the architecture, everything. Dutch governors ruled from Batavia for 300 years. It stood as the company's command center, and all the surrounding kingdoms and chiefdoms answered to its interests. But this scale of operation needed more than just bold vision and military force. It needed serious, continuous capital. Before we continue with how they revolutionized finance forever, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the invisible empires that shaped our world, do me a huge favor, hit that like button. Subscribe to Invisible Empires, and smash that notification bell so you never miss our videos uncovering the hidden forces that run our world. Trust me, what comes next is going to blow your mind. Now, let's get back to the story, instead of relying on kings or short-term loans like traditional power. The VOC created something the world had never seen before. They needed a system where regular citizens could buy into the company and stay invested long-term. They needed permanent capital that wouldn't dry up when a particular voyage ended or when a specific trade route failed. And this is where the real revolution begins. In August 1602, the Dutch East India Company opened its doors to public investment. For the first time in human history, a company offered its future to ordinary people through the world's first-ever initial public offering. The whispers had started even earlier. The VOC made its plans clear back in March when it signed its far-reaching charter, and once the shares hit the market, capital flooded in like a tidal wave. Behind those sales stood the same merchant elites who secretly ruled Dutch cities. The ones who kept money flowing like clockwork back into Amsterdam's markets and banks. But this raised a fascinating question: what kind of power could convince competing powerful families to put aside their differences and work together for a bigger future? The answer leads us right back to the House of Orange-Nassau. Sure, they backed this transformation, but they also depended on it desperately. At home, the political situation was incredibly unstable. Amsterdam's merchant class pushed hard for a tighter republican order. The House of Orange was still fragile, locked in this strange role as stadholders with royal ambitions but no throne to actually sit on. And abroad, even more dangerous, the Catholic superpower of Habsburg Spain still considered Dutch independence a crime punishable by death. Under this crushing pressure, feudalism offered no solutions. The House of Orange had no serfs to tax, no silver mines to exploit, no divine right to invoke, but they had one winning idea: rule through the market, not through the crown. This was absolutely revolutionary for its time. They decided to create an entirely new power base that went beyond land and precious metals. They built financial institutions that made risk predictable and profit scalable. At the core was a radical concept: permanent shares. For the first time ever, ownership in a global enterprise could be transferred freely between people. This innovation gave birth to the world's first secondary market, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, and innovations didn't stop there. Soon, traders went even further. They weren't just buying shares anymore, they were betting on what those shares would be worth tomorrow. They were creating markets for speculation and arbitrage. They invented hedging, every tool that Wall Street uses today. The Dutch invented it for centuries ago. But behind the markets and the mathematics, something else was needed to make this work: FOMO. Good old-fashioned fear of missing out. VOC shares became one of history's first major cases of mass investment mania. From an index value of just 100 in 1602, VOC shares soared to roughly 1,000 by the 1720s. That's a mind-blowing tenfold increase. And with that rise came something truly unprecedented: legal protection for investors. You see, building a global empire on public money came with enormous risks. What if a ship sank in a storm? What if a trade route collapsed? What if a war wiped out an entire settlement? The Dutch answered that fear with a legal breakthrough that changed investing forever: limited liability. Shareholders were only risking what they put in. If a ship sank or a trade route failed, Investors only lost their investment. Their personal property stayed safe. Their family homes stayed secure. Suddenly, people were far more willing to take calculated risks. It's a concept we still use today to separate personal assets from business liabilities, but back then, it was revolutionary. The VOC also printed actual share certificates, stamped, signed, and freely exchanged, for the first time in history. Ownership itself could be traded. It flowed from hand to hand, city to city, without needing royal permission or family inheritance. This changed everything. What's truly wild is that Dutch financial influence didn't just stay in the Netherlands, it crossed borders with incredible speed, reshaping Britain and eventually America. This influence spread through new ideas, powerful institutions, and one very particular man, William III of Orange. William was born into the Dutch royal house and grew up surrounded by merchants and their revolutionary financial models. But his real impact came much later, far from his home. In 1688, England was facing a massive political crisis. King James II had lost the trust of Parliament and the public. Tensions were at a boiling point, and in that chaos, British leaders desperately looked for a Protestant with a legitimate claim to the throne. They found one in James's daughter, Mary, who just happened to be married to William of Orange. William answered England's call. He sailed to England with his troops and, more importantly, with a mindset completely shaped by the Dutch Republic. He didn't see markets as a distraction from power, he saw them as the engine of power. This event became what history now calls the Glorious Revolution. Soon after, William and Mary took the English throne in a rare joint monarchy. But this wasn't just a political change. It was a financial revolution. During William's reign, England launched the Bank of England, created public credit systems, introduced government bonds, and began funding its wars through capital markets instead of just taxes. These were all Dutch innovations, now written directly into British law. And they gave Britain a financial firepower it never had before. But the story doesn't stop there. It reaches even further back and across the Atlantic. Decades before William ever set foot in England, Dutch ships had already crossed the ocean. In 1609, a ship sailing under the backing of the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, reached the harbor we now call New York City. A few years later, in 1624, the Dutch West India Company founded New Amsterdam at the southern tip of modern-day Manhattan. At first glance, it looked like just another trading outpost. But its design told a completely different story. It had organized streets, strong trade networks, and diverse immigrant communities. The Dutch were building something rare, a commercial hub on its way to becoming the financial capital of the New World. Amsterdam's influence was everywhere in how credit flowed, how contracts were honored, and how this tiny settlement was linked to global markets thousands of miles away. In 1664, the British took over and renamed the settlement New York. But they didn't wipe the slate clean. They kept the Dutch structure intact, the legal systems, the financial habits, the commercial customs, because they worked. These systems blended into British practices and quietly endured for centuries. Meanwhile, back in Europe, another transformation was happening. In the 1600s, Amsterdam and London had very different financial personalities. Amsterdam favored banks and public credit. London, on the other hand, leaned into speculation and fast-moving securities markets. But by the 1700s, the financial elites of both cities began to work in perfect harmony. Amsterdam's bank-oriented finance started cooperating closely with London's market-oriented system. Together, they created a new kind of economic dominance. Dutch reliability in deposits and clearing met British innovation in securities and trading. It was a powerful combination, and this blend didn't stay confined to Europe. Thanks to their shared colonial connections, especially the Dutch roots of New Amsterdam and the later British takeover, these financial ideas traveled west across the Atlantic. New York inherited legal structures, credit customs, and institutional habits from both Amsterdam and London. That shared DNA quietly laid the groundwork for something massive. Over time, those foundations helped transform a small port town into a financial engine that would eventually rival and then surpass its European parents. The influence of these early Dutch financial systems is everywhere today. From the old VOC trading ports to New York City's financial district, from the London Stock Exchange to the halls of Parliament, Dutch innovations literally wrote the blueprint for modern capitalism. And long after the VOC's final voyage, its methods continued to echo in boardrooms, banking regulations, and stock markets all around the globe. It's clear the VOC was revolutionary. It completely transformed trade, corporate finance, and the very nature of state power forever. But even giants have their limits. By the late 1700s, cracks began to show. The company that once ruled the seas started sinking under the weight of its own ambitions. Power had scaled incredibly fast, but oversight had failed to keep pace. Corruption slowly crept in like rot in the hull of a ship. Internal divisions deepened, with rising military costs and fierce competition from Britain and France. The VOC found itself surrounded on all fronts. At first, it managed to survive on sheer momentum, but slowly, inevitably, its grip loosened. Behind the scenes, the entire structure grew hollow. Decision-making became sluggish and inefficient. Officials started focusing more on their own pockets than on the company's future. The incredible discipline that once made the VOC so unstoppable had completely eroded. Global markets themselves began to shift. They became less tolerant of monopolies and more open to faster, more flexible competitors. By 1795, the VOC was no longer the all-powerful giant it once was. Finally, the Dutch government had to step in, take control, and nationalize the crumbling company. The once mighty corporation had managed to stay afloat for nearly 2 centuries. It was founded in 1602 with a 21-year monopoly on Asian trade. And it finally wound down in 1796 when the Dutch government officially took over. The mighty charter had quietly expired. The story of the Dutch financial revolution and the VOC is a powerful lesson in how ideas can shape the world, for better and for worse. It shows how innovation can build empires, but also how even the greatest empires can fall when they lose their way. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.